Nigeria's Electoral Commission has a document proving another party filed this logo before the one carrying Peter Obi to 2027, and INEC knew it the whole time. The official position is that this is a routine trademark dispute between two minor parties, resolved on a technicality nobody outside a courtroom should care about. The Commission's own records say otherwise, and those records place a presidential candidacy on the wrong side of a filing date. This is not a story about a logo. It is a story about whether a court order that took a political party from nothing to ballot-ready in 8 weeks can be unmade just as fast in the exact week that nomination deadlines close. The logo is the occasion, the timing is the subject. Here is the question that will not be answered until the end of this investigation. Why did the same judge rule on the same facts 8 months apart, and what actually changed in between wasn't the logo? In Nigeria, the fastest way to stop a candidate is never to say his name. If you want to see exactly what changed between those two rulings and what it reveals about who is counting on you never connecting the dates, subscribe now. What comes next is the part of this story nobody else has pieced together yet. The Nigeria Democratic Congress first tried to register as a political party in 2017. The Independent National Electoral Commission rejected its bid, citing concerns that its proposed logo too closely resembled another party's emblem. The party's own national leadership has since said that early rejection was tied to similarities with the ruling All Progressive Congress symbol. For nearly 8 years, the NDC existed as an unregistered association, one of dozens seeking recognition it could not get. That changed on December 10, 2025. Justice Issa Dashen of the Federal High Court in Lokoja ruled that INEC's continued refusal to register the NDC violated the party's constitutional right to freedom of association and ordered the commission to register it. On February 5, 2026, INEC Chairman Joash Amupitan announced the NDC's registration alongside one other party. Within weeks, 2 of Nigeria's most recognized opposition figures, former Anambra Governor Peter Obi and former Kano Governor Rabiu Kwankwaso, adopted the NDC as their platform for 2027, with Obi as presidential candidate and Kwankwaso as their running mate. The surface narrative is that the NDC simply won a long overdue legal fight against an obstructive commission. The buried narrative sits in what happened next. A group calling itself the Peace Movement Party approached the same court, claiming it had submitted the exact 2-finger victory sign logo the NDC used to secure its registration, and that it had submitted it first. Here is the fact that reframes everything reported about this case so far. When INEC was asked directly, the Commission confirmed both parties had filed the same logo design, and that the Peace Movement Party's filing predated the NDC's. That admission did not come from a rival politician or a leaked memo. It came from the Electoral Commission itself, on record in court. The concealment this trigger event activated is the same one from the opening. A registration built in 8 weeks now sits exposed to being unbuilt in one court sitting, on facts the Commission had in its possession the entire time.
Nigerian electoral law gives INEC and the courts wide discretion over party registration disputes, with no statutory clock forcing a resolution before a nomination window opens. That gray zone is exactly where this fight lives, and it has not been resolved because no single actor, not INEC, not the judiciary, not the parties themselves, has an incentive to close it quickly. Ask who benefits from an unresolved dispute rather than a resolved one, and the answer has nothing to do with who owns a hand sign. Any bloc that prefers Peter Obi and Rabiu Kwankwaso tied up in litigation rather than campaigning benefits from delay alone, regardless of how the underlying ownership question is eventually settled. Time spent defending a registration is time not spent building structures against rivals already deep into their own candidate submissions. The 2027 calculation embedded here is straightforward. An NDC still fighting for its legal existence in July has less runway to consolidate before the presidential race than a party whose registration was never in question. Every week this stays in court is a week Dixon's Niger Delta base, Kwankwaso's northern structure, and Obi's southeastern support spend managing uncertainty instead of mobilizing voters. Regional blocs are positioning accordingly, but the most telling posture belongs to the party that has said nothing at all. The All Progressives Congress has issued no public position on the NDC's registration fight, even while it was simultaneously reshuffling dozens of its own National Assembly candidates in the same news cycle. A ruling party with no visible stake in whether an opposition platform survives its own courtroom test is not a ruling party without interest. It is a ruling party that does not need to say anything because the process is already doing the work. Follow what the NDC had already built by the time this reversal landed. Ward level, local government, state and national congresses completed, a full national convention held, primaries concluded for every elective office monitored by INEC itself. That is not a shell registration. That is sunk institutional cost, money, volunteer hours and organizational infrastructure sitting exposed to being voided over a filing date dispute. One detail keeps surfacing in every account of this case, and it will matter more than anyone covering it so far has let on. NDC's own leadership has acknowledged that before going to court, the party asked INEC for permission to submit a fresh logo. It then proceeded to court relying on the same disputed symbol anyway. Hold on to that. It changes what comes next. Ambiguity in electoral law isn't a flaw regulators forgot to fix. It's a lever every side keeps sharpened for exactly the moment they need it.
But here is what almost nobody covering this story has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture. The NDC knew about the logo conflict before it ever went to court. A court able to unmake a party's registration mid-cycle does not just decide one party's fate. It shifts real power over who appears on the ballot away from voters and toward whichever motion reaches whichever judge next. That is the federal balance question this case actually raises, far beyond Kogi State or the Lokoja courtroom where it is being argued. The economic cost is concrete. Months of donor funding, volunteer mobilization, and state-level campaign infrastructure built by NDC chapters across the country sit exposed to a single ruling voiding the registration that made all of it legal. That is not an abstraction. It is organizational capital that does not rebuild on short notice. There's a security dimension too. A credible opposition ticket abruptly locked out of ballot access late in an electoral cycle carries the same disillusionment risk that followed the contested 2023 result, a risk this channel has tracked before, and one Nigeria's institutions can least afford to reopen. Now, resolve the detail flagged earlier. NDC's own request for a fresh logo, followed by its decision to proceed in court on the disputed one anyway, is precisely what gave the Peace Movement Party and the court a technically legitimate opening. This vulnerability was not manufactured by an outside actor. The NDC built it into its own case, and everything that followed exploited a door the party left open itself. This did not happen in isolation. Days before Justice Dashian's reversal, a separate federal high court in Abuja had ordered INEC to deregister 5 other opposition parties: the African Democratic Congress, Action People's Party, Action Alliance, Zenith Labour Party, and Accord, over claimed poor electoral performance. The Court of Appeal had to stay that ruling on June 16. 2 separate courts, 2 separate legal theories, 5 additional opposition parties, all converging on the same window ahead of 2027. In Nigeria, institutional power is rarely seized outright.
It's exercised through timing, and timing needs no signature. The strongest case against everything argued so far deserves to be stated plainly because it is not weak. The Peace Movement Party's claim is not fabricated. INEC's own commission records place its logo filing before the NDC's, and the party was never joined to the original December 2025 suit despite a ruling that directly affected its rights. On pure procedural grounds, Justice Dashen's fair hearing correction does not require voiding an entire registration, congresses, a convention, completed primaries, ballot inclusion, when a narrower remedy was available. Hearing the Peace Movement Party specifically on the logo question without unwinding 8 months of downstream party building that had nothing to do with the disputed symbol. Here is the honest concession stated without softening it. The single data point that cuts against this investigation's own thesis is that NDC leadership has acknowledged asking INEC for a fresh logo before its court filing, meaning the party knew its position on the symbol was contestable and proceeded to litigate on it anyway. That is a real self-inflicted legal exposure. It is not a fabricated grievance, and pretending otherwise would be advocacy, not analysis.
But an unforced error explains why the NDC was vulnerable. It does not explain why the correction arrived in the exact week nomination deadlines opened, or why it moved in near lockstep with a separate attempt to strip 5 other opposition parties of their registration. Vulnerability and timing are 2 different facts. Only one of them is coincidence. The misconception worth correcting directly. This is not a story about whether the NDC's logo is legitimately its own. That question remains before the courts and deserves a real hearing. This is a story about how a legitimate procedural question gets scheduled for maximum political effect. Was Justice Dashen correcting a genuine fair hearing violation, or was a court being used to run out the clock on an opposition ticket ahead of 2027? Type which one you believe and why. If you think Nigerians deserve to know the difference between the two, that's worth a like. Not for this channel, but as a signal that this level of scrutiny is what Nigerians are demanding right now. The NDC's Court of Appeal case now moves on an expedited track, shaped by 2 hard deadlines: National Assembly candidate submissions closing July 11, governorship and state assembly submissions closing July 17. Watch whether the appellate court rules on jurisdiction, whether the trial court had any power left to revisit its own final judgment before those dates or after. The timing of that ruling will tell you more than its content. Watch for 3 things in the coming weeks: any Court of Appeal listing scheduled before July 11, any fresh INEC statement on the NDC's portal status, and whether the Peace Movement Party's underlying ownership claim on the logo actually gets a substantive hearing date rather than remaining a procedural lever with no resolution in sight. What changed between Justice Dashen's December ruling and his June reversal was never the logo. It was the moment a technically sound third-party complaint surfaced at the precise point where the case's outcome had grown too consequential for anyone to leave unexamined. If courts can unmake a party's registration mid-cycle with no statutory deadline forcing resolution, every future opposition platform inherits the same exposure the NDC carries right now: a permanent late-stage veto point over who reaches the ballot, available to whichever side reaches the courtroom first. If the logo dispute is real, and the filing dates say it is, why did it take a presidential candidacy to make anyone rule on it with urgency? You now know something most Nigerians watching tonight's headlines will not: that this was never just a logo story. Somewhere in your circle, someone is still calling this a trademark dispute between 2 parties nobody's heard of. Getting them the real picture before July 11 makes it irrelevant is not this channel's job. It's yours now. The next investigation picks up a thread we've been tracking in Rivers State: Fubara's withdrawal from the APC primary and Wike's consolidation of power through Kingsley Chinda. One name is starting to connect both stories, and we're not done pulling on it.
This is Naija Unmasked. We don't guess at the mask, we take it off.